Chapter 506, Who Dares Win? Amidst the disarray of the mountainous cavern, the spell cultivator's gaze fell upon his adversary who had abruptly materialized out of nowhere earlier, now buried under a mountain of rocks and clearly unconscious. Beneath the tattered face mask was a comely and youthful countenance, but that was not what the enemy spell cultivator was looking at. It was a shimmering glint that had caught his attention. He looked closely, and when he realized what it was, his heart almost skipped a beat. A gold amulet. Overwhelmed with delight, the spell cultivator couldn't help but feel that the gold amulet falling into his lap must be some sort of well-deserved providence. As much as he was puzzled by the sudden appearance of this mysterious Grand Sky Coalition cultivator and the presence of an explosive ward, all of his focus and mind was centered upon the irresistible gold amulet gleaming proudly before him. He strode forward instinctively, driven more by greed and joy before rationale took hold and made him stop. Although the explosion of the explosive ward earlier showed formidable power, it would still take more than that to fully kill a Cloud River Realm cultivator. Therefore, he should still be alive. And his garb strongly suggested that he was a combat cultivator. This fellow must be playing dead to get me closer. The Thousand Demon Ridge cultivator might not be a genius, but he wasn't foolish enough to not see that coming. If a combat cultivator could get close to him, especially under such narrow and cramped conditions in the cave, then he could expect nothing but an impending and inescapable woe. Knowing full well that he ought to be cautious, he channeled his spiritual power, his hands performing several hand seals. Whether the enemy was dead or not, the spell cultivator needed to fire a blast or two at him, just to make sure. If the enemy had indeed fainted, then this would send him to meet his maker for good. But if he was really trying to feign being knocked out cold, this attack would make that a reality. No matter what the outcome was, he was determined to get his hands on the amulet and kill the enemy. As he prepared to strike, he sensed another signature of spiritual power coming from behind him. Before he could wheel around, he could hear something screaming through the air. The spell cultivator swiveled around at once. While the entirety of his vision focused on seeing several auroid sides arcing straight at him, his peripheral vision caught sight of a figure small and lithe of girth. The spiritual power signature was coming from her, and the golden scythe-like projectiles were hardly the only things in store. There was even a huge fireball that she was preparing to hurl at him. When did she get here? The spell cultivator's face fell. As a Cloud River Realm 6th Order, he took pride in his spiritual senses and awareness. But now that he realized that his opponents were a First Order spell cultivator and a Third Order combat cultivator, what dread of death in him vanished, replaced by apoplectic rage. "You have a death wish, don't you?" the spell cultivator snarled. He flung a hand at Lu Yi, and the image of a giant hand appeared and clawed at Lu Yi. He could easily deal with a First Order later. Right now, he needed to defeat the stronger Third Order enemy first. Especially since he was also a combat cultivator who had a geographical advantage in this terrain. Once Lu Yi had been dealt with, he could easily crush a First Order spell cultivator in due time. In the meantime, Yi had not stopped her ongoing barrage of spells pelting at the spell cultivator's shield, its every hit eliciting tiny bursts of sparkles falling to the ground like cinders. As the giant hand groped for Lu Yi, he responded by firing a Fire Phoenix spell at it. The flaming projectile reminiscent of a bird slammed into the hand, and the collision set forth a wave of spiritual power that gave Lu Yi the chance to bolt forward. With a frigid and menacing glare, the spell cultivator locked his gaze on Lu Yi. As soon as the latter reached within a certain range, he deftly repeated his earlier tactic, unleashing a raging torrent of spiritual power, an awesome repulsive force that ravaged everything in its path. So formidable was this force that even Yi's spells were dispelled before they got any closer to hitting the luminescent shield. Lu Yi seemed entirely unfazed, as if the tremendous impact of the repulsive force was as gentle as a midnight breeze. He momentarily paused as the force came crashing towards him, but then quickly resumed his charge towards his target, undeterred. Lu Ye's extensive experience in eliminating spell cultivators had made him well versed in their methods. The ability to repel enemies in close proximity was a commonly employed survival technique among spell cultivators, but it posed no challenge for Lu Yi. He knew that the key to neutralizing such a move was to maintain a safe distance from his opponent. Lu Yi swiftly closed in on his opponent and, in one fluid movement, swung his weapon upwards. Next, he brought it down with every ounce of might and speed he could muster. His ultimate move, Flash. That initially surprised the spell cultivator. But he remained calm. Having been wounded by Lu Yi before, he knew that a strike from a cultivator at Lu Ye's level was not enough to kill him. His magical shield had prevented any penetration, but the sheer physical force behind it, despite causing him some discomfort, was still not enough to threaten his life. To no surprise, the blow came down and the luminescent shield was holding. Its sheen had weakened somewhat, but it had not failed entirely. All he needed to do was to re-inject a fresh spurt of spiritual power and the shield would be restored. The excruciating pain of the massive impact contorted his face, causing him to careen uncontrollably backward. Despite his attempt to activate his spiritual power to repair his weakened spiritual barrier, Lu Yi relentlessly pursued him like a bloodhound on a scent, catching up to him and delivering yet another devastating blow. The magical shield grew increasingly fragile. Then came a third blow. A bone-splitting din screamed out, twisting the spell cultivator's expression into one of terror. Frantically, he attempted to replenish the integrity of his magical shield with his spiritual power, but even with his swift efforts, it nevertheless required time. Time that Lu Yi wasn't going to give him. The already dim spiritual barrier had only just begun to regain its strength and shine brighter when Lu Ye's fourth blow arrived. It was all a combination of strokes. With a loud crack, the shield shattered, leaving the spell cultivator defenseless as the blast threw him backward with a trail of blood spraying into the air. Along with the shield, the fourth blow sliced off the spell cultivator's right arm cleanly. The spell cultivator reeled off amid a deafening scream of agony from him. Lu Yi landed on the ground, gasping for breath. Despite his progress, using combination techniques with Flash active resulted in a tremendous strain on his body as each strike required him to exert himself to the fullest. The flesh and blood on his arm throbbed and pulsed from the strain, and the angry red soreness gathering through the entire length of his arm, now feverish scarlet, refused to scatter. But it mattered little at the moment. In the meantime, he did not stop hurling spell after spell at the spell cultivator who had to duck and evade, even in the most undignified manner, as he squealed like a hog. With his right arm severed and the cycle of his macrocosmic orbit interrupted, the spell cultivator's strength was greatly diminished. He clutched his wound, failing to staunch the flow of blood still gushing out the morbid stub, as panic began to fill his gaze. It was hard for the spell cultivator to imagine suffering such a huge loss against anyone weaker than him, a third-order combat cultivator and a first-order spell cultivator no less. The relentless style of fighting was unlike anything he had ever seen before. Reacting quickly, the spell cultivator wheeled around and raced for E, firing a spell at her as he drew nearer. He quickly dodged it and discorporated as if she had melted into the ground. That stunt confused the spell cultivator, and it provided an opening, leaving him vulnerable to a heavy blow to his back, sending him crashing to the ground with excruciating pain. The spell cultivator had broken the single most important rule, to not expose his back to the enemy. The sixth-order spell cultivator had lost all sense of judgment because of the pain from his wounds. But few could ever remain calm, especially at the sight of impending death. More often than not, their errors caused by the disoriented judgment often have the better of them. The enemy lay in agony with a gaping wound in his back that almost exposed his insides. With his quarry incapacitated on the ground, Lu Yi caught up and stepped on his back. Next, he held his weapon in a backhand grip and drove the weapon through his fallen enemy's heart, the weapon's blade bristling with spiritual power and double sharp edges activated. It plunged through him and poked out the front, impaling his heart in the process. The spell cultivator recoiled with unimaginable pain, the residual spiritual power inside him detonating like a dynamite with waves of spiritual power pulsing before everything went back to silence. That knocked Lu Yi off his feet, slamming him into a nearby rock face with blood bursting out as his saber was dislodged from the body. When Lu Yi finally got back to his feet, there was the spell cultivator, now dead with a pool of red underneath him. He quickly scrambled to collect all his belongings and the dead enemy's storage bag that she tossed to Lu Yi before she vanished back into amber. Lu Yi raced out of the cave and sped away as quickly as he could, disappearing into the night. By the time more cultivators arrived because of the commotion the fight had caused, all they found was a disfigured, dead body. The wounds on the body showed how furious the fight was, and the winner appeared to be a combat cultivator armed with a saber. That was all that they could determine considering the lack of evidence. Chapter 507, Number 1. After another 2 days of slaughter and butchery, which was just 2 normal days by the Carnage Coliseum reckoning, Lu Ye's name on the Carnage roster had plunged beyond the 80th mark. One could almost say that it was just a matter of time before his name fell further and out of the list entirely. But killing the spell cultivator had seen his name regain a sudden spurt of life, propelling up to somewhere in the 50s. That was an unbelievable increment of 180 Carnage points. Many had noticed the new development on the Carnage roster, including Wei Quebec. He had been combing the Coliseum for prizes while hunting for any signs of Lu Yi. While his search had yielded a trove of treasures enough to make him happy, he was not amused at the lack of information on Lu Yi. Without any hints at all, there was little he could do in a vast space more than tens of thousands of miles in length and breadth. Knowing that Lu Yi was just a Cloud River Realm Third Order, it wasn't hard for him to do the math to make out that Lu Yi must have just slain a Sixth Order to gain that many Carnage points. For a Cloud River Realm Third Order to kill a Sixth Order, just thinking about it could make him shiver. That would explain why every sect and order in the Thousand Demon Ridge Alliance had been so fearful of this person. Let him grow, and one day he might really become a figure that would forever torment the whole alliance at large. If today he could kill an enemy 3 ranks beyond his, he might one day be able to kill a real Lake Realm or even Divine Ocean Realm cultivators. Meanwhile, Jiang Liuzi and his brother Tu have noticed Lu Ye's name once again making headway on the Carnage roster. Deep inside, they were thankful Lu Shu had summoned them, drawing them away from their hunt on Lu Yi, or else, there was no telling if cornered, Lu Yi might be the one who turned the tables on them instead, and the hunters might become the hunted. At the same time, aside from fear and apprehension, the brothers had admiration and awe towards how Lu Yi had fared in this Coliseum. A Cloud River Realm Third Order who was barely hiding, and instead of keeping a low profile, he had been roaming around freely, swashbuckling with complete impunity for a position on the Carnage roster? Is he really not afraid of any reprisal from the Thousand Demon Ridge? If only Lu Yi knew what they were thinking about, he would be in such an uproarious protest. What others didn't know was the time and trouble that he had gone through to build all 12 teleportation wards. What the others did not know was that he had been strenuously trying to keep his head low and just wanted to stay alive. What ruckus he had caused was not of his own volition. It was trouble that never stopped darkening his doorway. And for that he really was feeling exasperated. At the moment, Lu Yi did not have the time or fancy to look at the Carnage roster. He hurried away from the cave and found another quiet spot where he immediately got to work constructing a new teleportation ward. That took a full hour before Lu Yi could finally breathe easier. He stuffed a spirit pill into his mouth and felt the sensation of his spiritual power replenishing. He had lost 3 out of the 12 teleportation wards he had prepared and had to make a new one, bringing the total up to 10 wards still remaining. He reflected on that last duel. It was dangerous, but he had managed to win because the enemy had been careless. Yi's attack from behind had distracted him enough for him to close distance, plus the terrain itself had given him an advantage. The cramped space had made it easy for Lu Yi and Yi to pin down that opponent and launch their attacks from both fronts. She provided much of the diversion while he went for the kill. That was how they ended the fight quickly. It would not have been so easy if it were outside in the open. He could kill Fifth Orders with relative ease, and killing Sixth Orders would be immensely tricky. But if Lu Yi were to encounter any Seventh Orders, then the only thing to do would be to run, flee as quickly and as far as possible. The first order of business remained the same as before, to get stronger as quickly as possible before he walked right into another enemy far too strong for him to handle despite how wide plethoras of tricks he might have hidden up his sleeve. His fox motif face mask had been shattered, which was expected, knowing how the masks were just ordinary face masks. It was damaged when a large rock hit Lu Yi in the face during the fight in the cave, causing him several cuts. Lu Yi removed the damaged mask and sat down quietly. The 24-hour limit of the gold amulet would be up at any time. Lu Yi did not know if there would be a fourth eruption, but if there was, then this new teleportation ward would have to be forfeited as well. Time passed by quickly. Lu Yi was cradling the gold amulet in his arms when a sudden emanation of light burst from it. He dismally watched it with a sense of resignation. The gold amulet surged, firing a powerful beam of light that soared straight into the heavens overhead while emitting waves of spiritual power that every cultivator within 100 miles would sense. Swiftly, Lu Yi activated his teleportation ward, intending to shift himself to a different location. However, he was met with abrupt dismay upon discovering that the next teleportation ward he had selected was no longer accessible. The magical link was no more. That would mean that the teleportation ward had vanished, possibly due to an unwelcome intruder who had set off an explosion that laid waste to everything he had prepared. Despite his best efforts to conceal the ward in a remote and concealed locale, other cultivators must have been searching the place for hidden prizes until they came across the cave and decided to look inside. Fortunately, Lu Yi knew this would happen and he had prepared for this possibility. To that end, he had ensured that every teleportation ward could connect to at least 2 other wards nearby. In this case, he still has one more option to pick. With his new destination selected, Lu Yi reactivated the teleportation ward and he vanished, fading into the ether. Lu Yi immediately surveyed his surroundings the moment he appeared, ensuring that he was alone and no one was looking. Satisfied at last, he finally let out a sigh of relief. He extracted the gold amulet from his pocket. The long 24-hour duration had finally passed and the pale emerald glow that wrapped around the amulet was gone. At last, he could put the amulet away into his storage bag without any hindrance. A gold amulet. Lu Yi mused with a certain degree of disbelief and amazement. Losing a few teleportation wards in exchange for 1 gold amulet seemed like a fair bargain. But Lu Yi wasn't thrilled enough to want to experience this again. He would rather that the heavens select someone else to inflict its divine machinations on instead of him. His initial impression was that 12 teleportation wards would be sufficient for his use, but it seemed that he had underestimated the perils and challenges that abound in the Colosseum. On paper, he still had 8 teleportation wards remaining, but he could not be sure if every one of them was functioning as intended or how many of them had ceased to exist. He wouldn't know unless he were to examine all of them one by one. Nevertheless, activating teleportation wards emitted spiritual power signatures that others could detect. This was reason enough to discourage him from activating any one of them unless necessary. He could set up more wards, but to do that he would need to produce more ward flags. He had already used up his supply with the last teleportation ward he had constructed. As much as he still had enough materials to make new ones, the process itself would also emit spiritual power signatures, which would risk exposing him, which could expose his hiding location. The opening duration of the Carnage Colosseum was usually unpredictable, lasting as long as a half-month or even a full one. But in just 2 days, almost 1/3 of his wards were gone. He would need to think of something if he wanted to maintain them until the end of the Colosseum. Lu Yi meditated and trained in the vastness of the cave with handling security for him. With alarm wards set up as well, he was not at all worried about being ambushed. Unbeknownst to him, the entire Colosseum was thrown into havoc the moment he shoved the gold amulet into his storage bag. As a result of that action, his position on the Carnage roster soared from the 50th place to the 1st. His Carnage points, from 550 points, had risen as much as 1,000, making the total some 1,550. The mere notion of 1,000 Carnage points itself was a terrifying, much less ludicrously unbelievable one. The kill of a Cloud River Realm 5th Order was valued at a mere 40 Carnage points. That would mean one had to kill 25 5th Order to get that many points. While Cloud River Realm 8th and 9th Orders all around the Colosseum had been busy killing and maiming to no end, none of them had come close to reaching that many Carnage points yet. Even second-placed Xiao Yang's score was a far cry away from Lu Ye's. Most if not all of the rest of the names on the Carnage roster had only 300 to 500 points, and the disparity further highlighted how incredible Lu Ye's 1,550 Carnage points were. There was not one cultivator in the Colosseum who was not shocked by this, notwithstanding those who already had their fingers on Lu Ye's name. This time, virtually everyone was looking at the Carnage roster, focusing on his name with incredulity. The Colosseum was abuzz with discussion. Who is this person? I have never heard of him before, many wondered. That a cultivator could be at the forefront of so many experienced Cloud River Realm cultivators on the Carnage roster must mean this person must be a powerful and strong warrior. But few had heard of the name Lu Yi, especially those who had spent so much time in the Cloud River battlefield that they had little to no recent knowledge about the Spirit Creek battlefield or even anything from the real world of Jianghu. But how could anyone increase his Carnage points by 1,000 in just one go? Have the heavens made a mistake? A Cloud River First Order who killed a Ninth Order would still not receive so many Carnage points. But there was little reason to doubt the heavens. The mysterious entity had a reputation for being fair and brutal at the same time. A mistake like this was never likely. Gain in Carnage points doesn't only occur from killing, but also from possessing that special gold amulet. The cultivator who was holding the gold amulet yesterday was awarded 300 Carnage points, someone pointed out. Why is it 1,000 today then? Asked another, perplexed. It depends on the person's cultivation rank and how long they had been in possession of the amulet within the 24-hour period. The lower the person's cultivation rank and the longer they hold on to it, the more Carnage points they will receive. It's the heavens who determine how much they will be awarded exactly. In this case, it's likely that this person has held the gold amulet for the whole duration of the 24-hour limit, and I dare say that their cultivation rank is no higher than the 5th order, if not lower. Wow, I have never heard of such a thing before. Thank you for enlightening us. To have such a low cultivation rank and yet manage to hold on to the amulet the whole time, this person must be incredibly powerful, exclaimed a third someone in awe. Maybe he or she's a ghost cultivator. Only ghost cultivators who excel in stealth have such an advantage, speculated another. Nay, I think I know who he is. Lu Yi of the Crimson Blood sect of Bingzhou province. Back then in the Spirit Creek battlefield, he caused enough upheavals to rile up everyone. And as far as I know, he is not a ghost cultivator but a combat cultivator, and his rank is definitely no more than the 5th order, a first order, most probably. He's been in the Cloud River battlefield for barely 2 months. What? A first order? Gasped one of them in shock. Any other first order would have found it an impossible task to survive in the Carnage Colosseum, let alone hold on to the gold amulet for 24 hours. Even for higher-ranked cultivators, the feat itself seemed unimaginable enough to accomplish. That was how many, who at first did not know how Lu Yi could earn so many Carnage points in one go, came to understand how this was just a reward from the heavens for a job well done. A job that not even the 7th or 8th orders could boast of completing. Chapter 508, An Incredible Figure. A ray of light landed just outside the Carnage Colosseum. It was Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan. They had rushed all the way here non-stop for 2 days. Despite the need for haste, they did not recklessly rush inside. They might not have participated in the Carnage Colosseum, but they had heard enough about the event to know that cultivators would be hiding in ambush around the entrance, waiting to waylay any unsuspecting fresh entrants to earn Carnage points. They looked for a secluded spot and sat down to meditate and recuperate. Almost 6 hours later, they got up. They looked at each other, a tacit sign that both of them were ready. Rays of light sparkled around them, more than 50 of them, and circled around them, each of them the conjuration of Li Baxian that resembled a swarming horde of flying swords. Ready? Li Baxian asked. Feng Yuechan nodded. Let's go then. The multitudinous shafts of light coalesced as one, joining together to form the likeness of a dragon that coiled around Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan, whisking them up into the air before slamming into the scarlet-red wall of light that was the entrance into the Colosseum. The air reverberated with the steely hum of the sword dragon that took into the air in its ferocious splendor. On the other side of the deep red sheet of light, scores of cultivators were waiting for their new prey when a sword dragon of white came blasting through the entrance of the Colosseum. The mere white-hot luminescence of the many sword-shaped shafts looked menacing enough to make any prowling enemy cultivator think twice about attacking. The dragon flew past the unseen gauntlets of cultivators that remained hidden and slithered through the air furiously, speeding away until it was out of sight. No one attacked it. Of the many cultivators that had been camping at the peripherals of the Colosseum's entrance, no one had done anything at all. No one could doubt that that must be a sword cultivator making his entrance into the Carnage Colosseum. The sheer amount of shafts of light prolifically fused into the semblance of a raging dragon was enough to dissuade any would-be assailants from doing anything stupid. What if it was someone incredible? The sword dragon itself was clearly a testament to the newcomer's might and prowess. Then attacking the newcomer would be nothing but a hasty and foolhardy mistake. A few champions quickly noticed that their caution was excessive, but by the time they realized that the sword cultivator that came in wasn't anyone overtly powerful, it was too late. The sword dragon had long streaked beyond their ability to catch up. Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan maintained their altitude for moments longer before they finally landed somewhere in the wilderness. Li Baxian dispelled the army of swarming lights and they dropped to the ground one after another. They made sure that they were alone before they finally breathed easily. "I wonder how Lu Yi is now," muttered a visibly distressed Li Baxian. He tapped his battlefield imprint to try reaching Lu Yi. He had not contacted Lu Yi since his last communication to prevent him from being worried about them. Now that they had come in, it was time to find out where he was. He knew that both of them might not amount to much, but he was sure that if he could join up with Lu Yi, they could at least make sure that he would be safe. Feng Yuechan was taking the time to look around them when Li Baxian was busy trying to raise Lu Yi when she looked up. This was her first time entering the Colosseum and she was still curious about everything inside. She had heard so much about how there were prizes abound on every corner of the Colosseum and perhaps this could be a chance for her to see the place for herself. It did not take long for her to notice the giant blood-red pennant magically hanging in midair, and once she saw the names, she realized that she was looking at the Carnage roster. Her gaze went up and down every column of names. When she reached the top of the list, those big beautiful eyes of hers went as wide as eggs. For one moment, she thought that her eyes were deceiving her. But once she looked again, she was right. Right at the topmost were the words that said Lu Yi. And after the name, it said that he had 1,550 Carnage points. The second-placed Xia Liang only had a little more than 1,000 points. Baxian. Feng Yuechan tugged at Li Baxian's shirt. Li Baxian was still trying to reach Lu Yi to ask him about his location. He turned around and looked at Feng Yuechan. "Look," Feng Yuechan pointed a finger at the sky. He looked up and saw the humongous pennant. Seconds later, his pupils contracted with disbelief. What? Number 1. The first word that crossed his mind was impossible. With so many champions congregating here, there was no way Lu Yi could have such might and power to be ranked not only first, but so ahead of the next runner-up with a several hundred Carnage points lead. More than 1,500 Carnage points. How many has he killed already? Is that really him or just a guy who shares the same name? But Lu Yi did not seem like a common name. At least not common for such coincidences where two people sharing the same name could be inside the Carnage Colosseum at the same time. Could it really be him? Li Baxian did not know what to think. He had come expecting to find Lu Yi trapped in one corner, fending for his life with perils skulking about, waiting for the best chance to strike. Yet if that really was Lu Yi at the top of the Carnage roster, then the worry and distress that had propelled him to come all the way here might have been for nothing. If that really is Lu Yi at the top of the roster, that would mean that he must be in hardly any danger at all. He's having fun. Nevertheless, he could not tell if that really was Lu Yi yet, not until he asked Lu Yi himself. "Lu Yi, that Lu Yi guy at the first place of the Carnage roster, is that you?" Lu Yi was sitting right at the center of another one of his many teleportation wards when he received word from his senior brother. He flatly denied, No, that's not even possible. His highest was somewhere between the 10th and the 20th spots. There might have been changes after he had killed that 6th order. By now, he expected that his name must have long dropped out of the roster again. To top it off, Lu Yi had only 3 kills under his belt, amounting to almost 550 Carnage points, which would bring him no closer to the top spot of the Carnage roster. Then it must just be a coincidence. There's a guy here with the same name as you and he's occupying the first place of the roster with 1,550 Carnage points, said Li Baxin while he thought. This fellow must be a 9th order. With this many Carnage points, there's no way he's a low-tier cultivator. Li Baxin knew exactly who the second-placed Xiao Liang was. Formerly one of the best cultivators of the Spirit Creek battlefield, the Raving Bladesman had once fought against Li Baxin before, and the latter knew for a fact that Xiao Liang was a powerful figure who was now beyond any doubt a 9th order. But this mysterious figure who shared the same name as Lu Yi was now the leading participant in the Carnage Coliseum, and that would mean he must be stronger and more dangerous than Xiao Liang. What an incredible figure! Far away, deep inside his cave, Lu Yi began to feel something had gone amiss. But he did not dwell too much into it. As far as he was concerned, he has only 550 Carnage points, not the amount that could possibly put him in the first place. What perturbed him more was the fact that Li Baxin had endangered himself by entering the Colosseum for his sake. It was a move that Lu Yi felt conflicted about. He was touched and worried at the same time. To say nothing of the other fact, that was how Li Baxin had deliberately kept this a secret from him. Only after coming in, did he finally reveal that he had come all the way here just to look for Lu Yi. Lu Yi extracted his 10-point map and ascertained his position, which he informed Li Baxin about. "We're coming for you, brother. Wait for us." After sending his last message, Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan set off for Lu Ye's position. It wasn't too far, and flying using telekinesis should have just taken 2 or 4 hours. But they could not risk being seen, therefore, they had to keep to the ground and to slower speeds. Quickly they pressed on. In the meantime, Lu Yi waited inside the cave quietly. All in all, Li Baxin coming to join him was nevertheless good news to him. Fighting with him around would mean higher survivability. At any rate, there were still the teleportation wards to rely on in the case of encountering any superior enemies. He did not neglect to notice that Li Baxin said, "we." That meant he had to be with someone else, which was most probably Feng Yuechan. How powerful they were right now, Lu Yi did not know. By his reckoning, they had entered the Cloud River battlefield a few months before he did, so they should be almost at the same level. Moreover, they had spent more than a decade in the Spirit Creek battlefield. The amount of experience and mastery of the skills they had amassed through so many years have made it easy for them to slay even cultivators beyond their current ranks. Especially since no one with just as much talent and gifts as them had stayed so long in the Spirit Creek realm. Yet all the time spent honing their experience and skills barely did any justice to the extraordinary natural gifts they had. Even those of average aptitude would find it unprofitable to linger in the Spirit Creek realm for more than a decade. In fact, such a prolonged stay could have been better spent advancing straight through the Cloud River realm and into the orders of the True Lake realm. Having pondered this, Lu Yi opted not to remain in the cave any longer. Instead he found refuge somewhere else and activated glyph, concealment to shroud himself from sight. Li Baxin was already on his way here, and it would be a massive quandary if he were to get himself trapped inside the cave when someone else were to arrive first. He could use his teleportation ward to escape, but that would mean he and Li Baxin would be separated. He could choose to stay and fight, but that would mean a certain amount of risk. Hence, he decided to just wait outside for better tactical mobility and flexibility. He had just settled in comfortably in his hiding spot when he remembered what Li Baxin was asking him about earlier. That made him look up at the Carnage roster hanging overhead. Li Baxin was right. There really was a Lu Yi in the lead. So there really is someone with the same name as mine, eh? That's amusing. His gaze began to travel downward. But the longer he looked, the more the sense of dread and disquiet intensified. Then he reached the bottom of the Carnage roster, where the last name had 530 Carnage points. By his calculation, he expected to have 550 Carnage points at least. That should place him somewhere in the 90th odd. Yet he could check for another 100 times and still, his name was nowhere else in sight other than at the top. There was only one Lu Yi in the Carnage roster and it was at the top. Wait, does that mean that I've been calculating it wrong? My Carnage points are not 550? That's impossible. I'm a 3rd order, but I've killed a 5th order, then a 7th followed by a 6th. That would mean that I've been awarded 120, 250, and 180 Carnage points respectively. That would be 550. There's no mistaking it. My rewards are directly tied to how much difference between my enemies' ranks and mine. The figure should be correct. He looked at the name at the top and saw the amount of Carnage points, 1,550. Wait, the number's strange. That's exactly 1,000 points more than what I calculated. Could that really be me? But where did that 1,000 points come from? Just when he was still struggling with what to make of the situation, waves of spiritual power signature from not far away diverted his attention back to reality. He listened, registering the archetypal ring of steel that could only come from swords. Next he looked up. Far away in the corners of the horizon, he could see pulsing waves of light. Someone must be there fighting and unleashing a gamut of spells. He delivered an urgent message to Li Baxian to inquire about his condition. No reply came. Lu Yi grunted. Yi knew what he wanted even before he said it. She dove right out of amber and discorporated, vanishing into the ground and speeding towards the direction of the battle. Lu Yi sprinted as fast as he could as well. Li Baxian did not reply. That could only mean one thing. He must be occupied by something. Plus, he should be arriving any minute now. That would mean that he and Feng Yuechan must have been intercepted by someone and they were fighting, which was confirmed by the clangor of steel and the intermittent bursts of spiritual power waves. Upon arriving at the scene, Lu Yi cast his gaze upward and was met with the stunning sight of deadly rays of light darting through the air in great numbers. Within a confined space, figures were skillfully maneuvering and crossing paths in the skies like shadowy phantoms, locked in a fierce battle. Lu Yi immediately recognized 2 of them, Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan. The former was fighting at his fullest with more than 100 shafts of light answering his every beck and call, a true display of how deadly sword cultivators could be. Chapter 509, Rendezvous. Lu Yi was right. Li Baxian came with Feng Yuechan and they were fighting side by side with each other. He with his telekinesis and she with her spiritual power pulsing in huge undulations as she fired one spell after another at their assailants. But there were not 3, not 4, but 5 assailants in all. Could have been more like. One of them was sprawled on the ground with a spreading pool of red beneath him. There was no telling if he was already dead, but he was clearly put to the ground by Li Baxian, no less. Another one was some distance away. His entire person radiated rich spiritual energy as he waved a ward flag, back and forth again and again. Without any doubt he had to be a ward cultivator and the signature of his spiritual energy indicated that he was a 5th order. So were the rest of the remaining 3 assailants still engaging Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan. They were also 4th and 5th orders. Yet despite their superior advantage in numbers, none of them looked like they were enjoying this one bit. If anything, their eyes were fraught with shock and trepidation for Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan must be far more powerful than they expected. It was an ambush that should have worked with the elements of superior numbers and surprise. Yet they were not able to capitalize on their advantage and defeat this duo. Instead one of them was killed. Fortunately for them, the ward cultivator had managed to activate the ward that he had cast beforehand in time, and that somehow evened the odds considerably. Nevertheless, that did not make the fight any easier. The deadly shafts of light with speeds, intensity, and power that could snuff out their lives if they were not careful, plus the powerful spells that never stopped screaming at them were all enough to make this easily one of the hardest skirmishes they had ever fought in. Where the hell did these 2 monstrosities pop out from? Instead of waylaying what they anticipated as easy targets, these enemy cultivators knew very well that they had just poked the hornet's nest. But it did not take long for the enemy 5th orders to realize that prolonging this fight was not going to end in their favor. Even if they could still hold their ground, the commotion of the fight could attract unwanted attention. All would still be well if allied Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators were to come this way. Any form of help would be sorely welcomed. But if it was someone from the Grand Sky Coalition, then these marauders would have to rue their poor luck. It was a 50-50 wager that none of them were willing to risk. "Hold up," one of them cried at last. "This is just a misunderstanding. Now, everybody stop and take one step back before we do anything else we might regret." As much as they wished to withdraw, this could only be done if both parties had arrived at an understanding, with Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan ceasing and desisting just like them. There was little pity for the one who was killed. As an outsider who was only roped in to make up the numbers, the others were more than willing to chalk his demise up to bad luck than to further endanger themselves. The cry did its job. Li Baxian quietly furrowed his brow and dialed back his power. Being trapped in the magical ward might have limited both his and Feng Yuechan's power to 8/10 of their usual level, but the presence of a ward cultivator in the midst of the enemy did not mean that he lacked both the confidence and ability to slay all these enemies. In fact, the odds of success were even higher with Feng Yuechan's help. The magical ward wasn't anything too powerful or complex for them to overcome. For more than 10 years he and Feng Yuechan had stayed in the Spirit Creek battlefield. They might have squandered precious time, but the time had also allowed them to develop valuable experience, skill, and maturity. The enemies were just a ragtag crew of a few mediocre 4th and 5th orders that never stood any chance in the first place. Then again, Li Baxian was hardly a fool who failed to recognize the risks of waging open combat in broad daylight within Colosseum grounds where untold perils awaited everywhere and anytime. His primary objective remained to regroup with Lu Yi. Relieved at the chance for a parley, Li Baxian grunted his agreement. "Very well." Li Baxian toned down his attacks further. The enemy 5th Order who sued for peace was about to heave a long breath of relief when a shrill cry of pain slashed across the newly minted truce. His face fell with dismay. That cry was the voice of the ward cultivator. His peripheral vision caught sight of a figure he had not seen before. Creeping up on the ward cultivator from behind, the stranger had impaled his saber through the chest of the ward cultivator, the cool glint of the weapon only veiled by the macabre sheen of blood on its surface. Blasted! When Lu Yi first got here, he immediately saw how Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan were pinned down. With his glyph insight, he quickly discovered that they were trapped in a magical ward that was being maintained by an enemy cultivator. That was what prompted him to stealthily sneak close and deliver his one-hit kill. His poor quarry had had his hands full in dealing with both Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan. Their deadliness and prowess had kept him so tense, anxious, and awed that he did not even see Lu Yi creeping closer. By the time he noticed Lu Yi lunging, it was already too late. Inviolable stabbed through his ribs, eliciting a huge fountain of blood out of the gash at his front when Lu Yi yanked it free before it came back in an arc that lopped off the head like a cook chopping off the greens on top of a carrot. At the same time, the swarming shafts of light that had been diminishing and their movements slackened suddenly flared up as if they were given a new lease of life. As Lu Yi decapitated his quarry, the shafts of light all dove at the 5th Order who called for a truce just now, raining a furious onslaught upon him that he could barely hold his ground as he stumbled backward due to the sheer strength of every shaft that attacked him. But just when he thought he had managed to regain a steady foothold, death came from behind. It was Lu Yi stepping within the bounds of the magical ward, charging straight at them. Inviolable swung in a deadly curve even before he got near. A scythe of glowing luminescence roared through the air and smashed through the enemy 5th Order's protective aura and blasted a gaping hole on his back that never stopped bleeding in profuse spates. All he managed to do was let loose one agonizing shriek that lasted not 1 second at all before he went dead silent. Lu Yi did not stop. He bolted past the dying enemy still wobbling and churning out blood, to race for his next target, his saber now dripping a slick trail of crimson as he moved. Only after he was far away did the 5th Order drop dead to the ground. But Lu Yi wasn't anywhere near his next target when the latter was hit by a lightning elemental spell. Serpentine tendrils of electricity snaked all over him, paralyzing him like a giant web of lightning as he slowly cooked to death before a second spell blasted a hole straight through his chest, killing him instantly. On the other hand, Li Baxian swiftly made short work of the last fourth-order enemy with his flying sword-shaped shafts of light. In barely 10 seconds, the battle was over, all thanks to Lu Yi. In the wake of that action-packed 10 seconds, Li Baxian and his junior brother shared a quick look at each other, the former's gaze filled with surprise and marvel. Lu Yi gave a wave and yelped, "Come on! This way!" He wheeled around and scampered off with Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan peeling closely behind. He quickly swooped up what loot she could collect before she went back underground and followed after them. As he ran, Lu Yi took the chance to look up into the sky. His vision homed in on the first name on the Carnage roster, and the dread and apprehension that followed made the corners of his eyes throb, both involuntarily and uncontrollably. Once they got inside the cave, Lu Yi instructed Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan on how to avoid triggering the explosive wards before they finally reached the vastness and safety of the rock chambers deeper inside. They sat down and Li Baxian looked around. His face went alight with amazement. What is this? A magical ward. He could tell that a magical ward had been constructed here, although his lack of knowledge in the arcane mastery of ward building prevented him from identifying it. But Lu Yi had brought them here. That would mean that this magical ward must mean something. A teleportation ward. What? A teleportation ward? Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan could not believe it. They had heard about how talented Lu Yi was in the mastery of ward casting, but neither of them knew that he was skilled enough to construct a teleportation ward. Neither of them had imagined this was possible, especially since Lu Yi was only just a Cloud River Realm cultivator. How far can you go with this? Li Baxian had to ask. The further the ward could reach, the greater its value would be. Teleportation wards that could go only as far as a dozen miles were useless, to say the least. Any other Cloud River Realm enemies worth their salt could easily close that amount of distance in no time. About 200 miles. Li Baxian inhaled a long, deep breath. Even Feng Yuechan looked utterly bewildered. They might be of similar ranks of cultivation, but they were nevertheless more experienced and seasoned than Lu Yi, and that was why they understood the significance behind Lu Ye's ability to construct a teleportation ward that could scale distances as far as 200 miles. For what it was worth, Lu Ye's skill and gifts in ward casting was far greater than they expected. And beyond any doubt, he had to have constructed several such wards or he would not have chosen to hide inside this cave. With these wards, Lu Yi would be able to maintain his safety even though he was weaker than most of the contestants of this Carnage Coliseum, assuming he hadn't been everywhere causing a ruckus and inviting unwanted attention. Still, Li Baxian could barely prevent shedding beads of anxious perspiration down the side of his face. He had been so worried about Lu Ye's safety, thinking that his young junior brother was trapped somewhere, besieged by mortal threats. It was this belief that had driven them both to rush here at once. Of all the difficulties they anticipated Lu Yi to be in, this scenario was definitely not what they envisioned. But this was unequivocally good news. Lu Yi was safe, and with these teleportation wards, he could easily escape if he encountered an enemy that was too powerful to handle. That reminded Li Baxian of something else, their rank of cultivation. Wait a second, you're a third order now, Lu Yi? It had not been 2 months yet since Lu Yi had made his ascension into the Cloud River Realm. That was why Li Baxian had been under the impression that Lu Yi was not in the second order yet until he noticed otherwise. I was lucky. I found a pocket dimension not long ago, and that allowed me to earn enough to exchange for several amulets. Li finally arrived as they were talking. She demurely bowed to Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan. My respects to you, brother Baxian and sister Yuechan. You've grown prettier since I last saw you, sister. Li Baxian nodded approvingly. Which was true. Since Yi and Amber's ascension into the Cloud River Realm, the former had begun to grow more beautiful as a woman. The praise made Yi so happy that her eyes turned into crescents. Feng Yuechan took her aside to talk, but not before he handed the loot she fetched from the scene of the battle earlier to Lu Yi. Lu Yi took the loot from her and laid it down. Then he began undoing the magical seals of every storage bag while he and Li Baxin continued their chat. Lu Yi had taken note of Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan's cultivation rank during the earlier fight. Both of them were one rank higher than he was, fourth orders. They had been here in the Cloud River battlefield longer than he was. His fortune had been good and so had theirs. To that end, everyone had managed to progress quickly enough. The conversation took a turn and Li Baxin began asking about the recent events in the Crimson Blood sect. Li Baxin sighed when he finally heard that the sect was improving and its future was bright and promising. This is where I say I'm sorry, brother. The sect's present prosperity was Lu Ye's single-handed hard work and toil. Back when he first arrived, there was no one else but him and Shui Yuan aside from their mentor Tang Yifeng. But today, the Crimson Blood sect could boast a membership of 700 to 800 man strong, if not 1,000, stationed at its outpost in the Spirit Creek battlefield. No other sect or order could possibly claim to wield similar strength and influence, especially in the outer ring regions of the battlefield. To say nothing of the blessings on the outpost's divine opportunity column that had ensured a level of spiritual chi ambience that few other outposts could emulate. Even the contribution points owned by the outpost were enough to purchase more blessings. Furthermore, the riches that the 1,000 Demon Ridge sects and orders had surrendered as tributes were enough for the outpost to go on operating for at least another couple or more decades. Such were the contributions that Lu Yi alone had made to the sect. Chapter 5:10, Blessed with Luck? Lu Yi finished unlocking the magical seals of the storage bags while they chatted. The number of enemies was only 5, but the amount of storage bags that he had recovered was a good 20 odd of them. The 5 did not need so many storage bags. Most cultivators had no more than 3 storage bags for convenience and classification of their items and equipment. Yet they had more than 20 bags in all, and Lu Yi could only think of one reason. These must be the bags they had looted off other poor victims they had waylaid and they had now become Lu Ye's prize. Lu Yi picked out 10 of the storage bags and slid the rest to Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan, which Li Baxin did not decline. As brothers in arms, there was no need to be coy. He took the storage bags and emptied them all. Lu Yi did the same. There wasn't anything remarkably precious to be expected, just some usual supplies that could be useful. There were items such as spirit artifacts and supplies that he could sell off for contribution points, but some he might take back to the main stronghold of his sect. Most Cloud River realm cultivators used middle-grade spirit artifacts and hence they could fetch very good prices. He went on searching through the pile of loot until he found a tiny little box glowing with an iridescent luminescence. He recognized what it was, a box containing an amulet. Without thinking further, Lu Yi flipped the lid open and a bluish glow came pouring out. God, you really have great luck, brother, Li Baxin moaned with amazement. Both he and Feng Yuechan had their own share of good luck since entering the Cloud River battlefield. In fact, he still had 3 boxes containing amulets himself, although he had never once gotten anything beyond a green amulet thus far. He had spoken to others at length about the unpredictability of such boxes which were more commonly known as amulet chests. The chest was enchanted by the powers of the heavens, the de facto entity shrouded with an enigma that governed all things, to grant its opener an amulet of varying quality, depending on their luck. It could be a gold, although the possibility would be absurdly slim. Even a purple amulet would be rare enough. Most cultivators expected to get a white or a green. Some with better luck might see a blue. That was why Li Baxin had decided to gather as many amulet caskets as possible and open them all together. Maybe that way he could obtain a good amulet. If he could not rely on his luck to provide him with a good amulet, then perhaps a bigger number of tries could tip the scales. But right here, right now, Lu Yi had stumbled on a blue amulet right off the bat. I think my luck has been good since receiving the gift of providence when I was making my ascension to the Cloud River realm. That last time when I discovered that pocket dimension I told you about. I found a magic that could manipulate the traits of a spirit beast. A stranger told me that selling it to the Vault of Providence would earn me the heaven's blessings, meaning that my luck would increase, and that was what I did. Wait, you got the gift of providence? Li Baxin yelped. That was the first time he heard about this. With him and Feng Yuechan already inside the Cloud River battlefield, Li Baxian was deprived of any fresh news from the real world of Jiuzhou and everywhere else outside the battlefield. Yeah, that explains it. Teacher had told me a long time ago that senior brother Feng, who was the last person to receive the gift of providence, had enjoyed a tremendous run of good luck after that. Anything he did, as if he had the help of the heavens themselves, would just work. That was how he became so feared and respected that at one point he wielded as much power and authority as the chief of the Grand Sky Coalition. So it was not just some fairy tale then. Then he had an idea. He extracted all 3 amulet caskets from inside his storage bag and handed them to Lu Yi. Try opening these for me, Lu Yi. Knowing that Lu Yi has been blessed with tremendous luck, letting him open the amulet caskets might be a good idea. There was a possibility of getting a gold amulet. That reminded Lu Yi about Xia Qianqian. She too had asked him to open her amulet casket just a few days ago. Instead of being able to make use of his good fortune, all she got was just a white amulet. 3 pairs of eyes stared intently. Lu Yi placed a hand on the first casket and flipped open the lid. A wash of white-hot phosphorescent came gushing out. Lu Ye's brow cocked with interest. Peculiar. Up until today, he had opened a total of 4 amulet caskets. The first one was his and it yielded a purple amulet. The next one was Xia Qianqian's, which spouted a white one. The third one, which was the one just now, gave him a blue amulet. Now this, another white. If the first time's a coincidence, what about this time? It's fine. Fortune can turn on a dime, brother. Let's try the next one, said Li Baxian. Lu Yi hesitated. Can you give these 2 caskets to me, brother? He asked gingerly. No problem. They're yours. If I had known about this, I would have tried to save more amulet caskets for you. Lu Yi did not wait. He was already opening the lid of the next casket. An emerald green glow came pouring out. A green amulet. Mediocre but still acceptable. Then the last casket. A breathtakingly rich violet incandescence blazed from within as soon as the lid cracked open, casting a purplish sheen on everyone's amazed countenance. Incredible! Exclaimed Li Baxian in disbelief. Even Feng Yuechan's eyes were the size of eggs. No one had expected that he would get a purple amulet, 27 times more valuable than a white, on his 3rd try. Seeing really is believing, and witnessing Lu Ye's extraordinarily remarkable fortune up close and in the flesh, one could well comprehend what an incredible boon the gift of providence was. Barely a month ago, Li Baxian was just telling Feng Yuechan how it could be easier to find a 4-leaf clover than expect amulet caskets to yield any amulets purple or beyond. A blue moon comes around about as often as such an improbable occurrence. Yet here, after almost 30 days, fate had elected to prove him wrong. Lu Yi slid the caskets containing both the green amulet and purple amulet back to Li Baxian. The latter peered at him incredulously. I think it only works when I'm opening my own amulet caskets. If I'm opening it on behalf of someone else, my good luck wouldn't work. That was why he asked Li Baxian to give him both the amulet caskets in the first place, he explained further. It was only to verify his guess. It could not be just mere coincidence when every single casket that he opened for others only yielded white amulets while those that belonged to him provided better rewards. But this proved his hypothesis. Whatever good luck the heavens had bestowed him with, it would only work for his benefit and his alone. Anyone thinking of exploiting this extraordinary providence through him would be sorely disappointed. Li Baxian peered at the amulet caskets and shook his head. No, brother. I cannot take them. Lu Yi was about to protest, but Li Baxian stopped him. Smiling, he said, I understand, brother. But luck is something intangible that you can't see or feel. If your current string of good luck is really a result of you receiving the gift of providence, then you should be even more careful. The reach of the entity we know as the heavens is far and boundless. Any form of perfidious manipulation or deceitful trickery in the use of this extraordinary luck you now embody might be seen as a slight towards this omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient being. That could affect the favor you now have with the heavens, or worse, see you ruined. What? Is that true? Lu Yi yelped with trepidation. It's prudent to practice caution, said Li Baxin pensively. When it came to the heavens, he would rather tread carefully than make flippant and sloppy mistakes. Not even the slightest one. Li Baxin would have readily pounced on the offer of a purple amulet if it were anyone else. The amulet would have ensured a huge increase in his power. But this was Lu Yi, his own brother-in-arms that he owed his loyalty to. He could not just sit and watch him commit what could be a disastrous mistake. He's right, Lu Yi, added Feng Yuechan. We can't be too careful with issues of such gravity. In the future, be wary of anyone wanting to make use of your extraordinary fortune for their own gain. You could put yourself at great risk. Lu Yi nodded. Very well. I'll keep the amulets. But you'll keep the rest of the loot. He pushed the pile of storage bags which was his portion of the bounty towards them. This time Li Baxin proffered no objection. Satisfied, he picked up the pouches piecemeal and appended each of them to empty their contents. Lu Yi examined the insides of his own storage bag. He had several amulets in total, 1 gold, 1 purple, 1 blue, 1 green, and a couple of whites, all of which should be enough for him to make it to the 4th order. He had progressed enough and it wouldn't be too long before he reached the next order, which would have to wait until the Carnage Colosseum ended. To consume amulets required time, a commodity that could be viewed as a luxury in the Colosseum. A white amulet needed barely a quarter of an hour, but a gold amulet would take at least a day and night to fully assimilate, and the process could not be interrupted. Any disturbance could cause terrible losses. Therefore the best solution would be to wait until the Colosseum had ended, then Lu Yu could start searching for a hidden and secure location. In that case, brother, you could just purchase any number of amulet caskets. Try to get as many as possible in the price range of green amulets. With your luck, you might have quite a haul waiting to drop on your lap, Li Baxin suggested suddenly. Green amulet? That would just be around 600 to 700 contribution points, in that case, quipped Feng Yuechan, chuckling. That's not a number of points that Cloud River Realm cultivators would hanker after. Therefore, amulet caskets gotta be higher than that. Remember, every single casket represents a cultivator's chance, however small it might be, to procure a gold amulet. If anyone's gonna sell caskets away for 600 to 700 contribution points, then they might as well just open the caskets themselves. Who knows? The heavens might somehow take a liking to them and drop them a gold one. Li Baxin thought about what she said and felt she had a point. You're right. That was true. Even he himself, now that he thought of it, would be reluctant to part with an amulet casket for a measly 600 to 700 contribution points. Like Feng Yuechan said, every casket represented hope. An amulet casket might reveal a gold amulet, and if this did really happen right after he had sold his casket to someone else, he would suffer a stroke. To say nothing of the fact that amulets remained an important, if not one of the few ways cultivators relied upon to progress. Most people immediately opened their caskets as soon as they found one, which would make amulet caskets a rare commodity to be offered up for sale. Hence, the idea of purchasing more amulet caskets was a dead end. While some cultivators could be tempted to part with their amulet caskets at the offer of a price that equaled blue amulets, there was no absolute certainty in whether transactions like this would be profitable or not. Nevertheless, that anyone would sell off their caskets in the first place remained a very, very big if. With the distribution of the loot, the amulet caskets were all opened, the looted storage bags emptied, and their contents tucked away. Completed, Li Baxin singled out one of the storage bags, filled with more spirit pills and stones, before tossing it to Lu Yi. Without waiting for a reply, Li Baxin pointed out, it's filled with ward flags. Lu Yi disavowed any thought of protesting. He peered inside. There really were several dozens of ward flags inside, making this the storage bag that once belonged to the ward cultivator he slew. Lu Yi had a good many ward flags before, but recent use had pretty much exhausted his supply, and this could not have come at a better time. He did not decline the offer and put away the storage bag. So, what are your plans after this, brother? Li Baxin asked. Well, at first, I was thinking of laying low here until the Colosseum ended. If anything happened, I'd just escape using these teleportation wards. And now? Li Baxin's brow cocked. He could hear that Lu Yi had something else in mind. Lu Yi sighed. Quietly he admitted, "Well, about that. There is something else that I've not yet told you about. I think the name now at the number 1 spot of the Carnage roster is mine." Chapter 511, I'm number 1. Inside the vastness of the underground cavern, Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan were staring blankly at Lu Yi. Seconds ticked by in silence before the stillness broke with Li Baxian uttering his question, "Wait. I thought you said that it was someone else." "That was what I thought at first. By my calculations before, I did not have that many Carnage points. The name in the first place has 1,000 points more than what I estimated I should have. It was after I killed those 2 fifth orders, I noticed that the Carnage points for the name in the first place rose by 240. They harked back at the fight just now. 5 assailants had waylaid Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan when they were coming here. One of them had already been killed by Li Baxian when Lu Yi arrived at the scene. Lu Yi first ambushed the 5th Order Ward Cultivator before he took down another 5th Order. That added 2 notches to his belt. As a 3rd Order, killing a pair of 5th Orders who were beyond his rank would earn him 120 Carnage points apiece. The name in the first place of the Carnage roster had 1,550 points when Lu Yi last checked. But after he had slain the 5th Orders, the tally had risen 240 points, making the total 1,790 points. With how he could no longer find his name amongst the 90-somethings, Lu Yi could only conclude that he really was number 1 on the Carnage roster. The amount of Carnage points rising definitely wasn't a coincidence. "But you said that the amount is 1,000 more than what you've calculated?" Pointed out Li Baxian. "Well, I can only think of one reason." Lu Yi extracted the gold amulet he stored inside his storage sphere. "It should be because of this," he said, referring to the amulet. "The heavens pick someone every day for this. Within the first 24 hours, this amulet can't be used, it can't be kept inside another dimension, and only after the 24 hours duration will the amulet be truly yours. I was picked once." Li Baxian pondered on other possible origins of the 1,000 Carnage points. Lu Yi was similarly incredulous himself, but he was convinced that his theory was right. It was a pity that the trove of information that he purchased from the Divine Trade Association did not include anything like this, or he would have been able to make sure. A 1,000 Carnage points difference. The amount itself was too large for a mistake. "Let me ask around," Feng Yuechan added suddenly, and she began communicating with other people. Li Baxian wasn't a very popular figure within the membership of the Devoted Ones, but Feng Yuechan was an altogether different case. Her pedigree, beautiful looks and grace, as well as her talents had made her a favorite to everyone in the order. For more than a decade she had watched scores of Devoted Ones leaving the Spirit Creek battlefield while she stayed back. By now, there were many who had reached 8th and 9th Order, and they had to know enough about the Carnage Coliseum. She got an answer quickly enough. Gold amulets bestowed by the heavens do indeed come with Carnage point rewards, and the points awarded commensurate with one's rank of cultivation and the duration of one's possession of the amulet. The lower your rank is and the longer the duration of your possession, the more Carnage points you'll get. A 3rd Order who had held on to the gold amulet for 24 hours. No one else across the real world of Jianghu save Lu Yi could have accomplished such a deed. No other 3rd Order could have survived the 4 instances of onslaught that happened after each time the amulet's eruption of spiritual power broadcasted his position. No 3rd Order could have fended off the attacks by so many enemy cultivators and still live to see the next morning. Yet Lu Yi managed to survive, and it was the success of such an impossible mission that had seen him being awarded 1,000 Carnage points. That propelled him to the top of the Carnage roster while leaving the first runner-up and the former leader of the roster miles behind. With this being the 2nd day of the Carnage Coliseum, there was one more gold amulet that was bestowed to an unknown cultivator. The gold amulet changed hands several times in the 24-hour duration until it fell into the hands of an 8th Order who managed to hold on to it for the last 4 hours, winning both the amulet and 300 Carnage points. Naturally, Lu Yi knew nothing about this. He had been busy skittering across the length and breadth of the terrain, searching for places to plant his booby traps and teleportation wards. That was marvelous. Li Baxian rubbed his palms expectantly. For most 3rd Orders, being bestowed a gold amulet by the heavens in the Carnage Colosseum was synonymous with being given a death sentence. But to Lu Yi, it posed no more danger than a walk through a minefield, but with all the astute preparations Lu Yi had done, the teleportation wards and the many explosive wards to protect them, the risk had been reduced to nil. That made this 1,000 Carnage points practically a free gift from the heavens. Li Baxin began to comprehend the extent of Lu Ye's good fortune. Well, my initial plan was to hide here for the sake of my safety. I thought that I might only come out after the Colosseum was over. But now, I'm beginning to think if winning the Colosseum might be a realistic prospect, the #1 spot on the Carnage roster. The reward would be a Primus-level Wisp of Sanctification and 9 gold amulets, prizes that anyone would gladly die for, which was one of the best kinds of rewards that Lu Yi could ever dream of. He could still remember the experience of losing that Tertius-level arcane glade. But he did not feel sorry at all. If anything, a Tertius-level arcane glade that had limited growth potential was more of a burden than a boon to him. But a Primus-level arcane glade would be different. Immensely different. While having one might not be urgent to him, it would definitely be a great help to Li Baxin, Feng Yuechan, and also Zhu. Having an arcane glade in this class would make it easier for them. They would no longer have to roam around looking for rewards and prizes while endangering themselves. Though this would still be slower than using amulets, it would be safer and steadier. However, what mattered the most to Lu Yi were the 9 gold amulets. At present, Lu Yi had enough amulets to reach the 4th order. But he was still in dire need of more to get stronger. Needless to say, it was Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan's presence that had given him both the courage and confidence to conceive the inspiration of winning the Carnage Colosseum. They were hardly the average garden-variety Cloud River Realm cultivators, and even though they were just 4th orders, they could easily give opponents 2 ranks beyond a run for their money. If he could work with them and win the first prize, he could divide the prize evenly with them. That would mean 3 gold amulets apiece, a prize that would make him progress even faster through the 4th order and save him a lot of time and trouble. In the meantime, he had to admit that he might very well be one of the weakest cultivators now in the Carnage Colosseum in terms of his cultivation rank. Nevertheless, to him, this could also be a form of advantage. An advantage in the form of gaining extra Carnage points whenever he slayed an enemy. Like contribution points, more Carnage points would be awarded if he were to kill an enemy if compared to Li Baxin killing one. In other words, with most of the enemies in the Colosseum being 8th and 9th orders, Lu Yi could slay an enemy 5th order and he would receive 3 times what most people earned when they also slayed a 5th order. If he slayed a 6th order, others would have to slay 4 to catch up. Hence, while it was easy for 8th and 9th orders to kill enemies weaker than them, the gain in Carnage points for Lu Yi would increase to commensurate with the difference between his cultivation rank and his opponents. That would make this an advantage to Lu Yi in comparison since he possessed the power to defeat opponents of ranks higher than his. With his prowess, he could easily have any ordinary 5th orders for breakfast, and the addition of Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan now made even defeating 6th orders a virtual certainty. As for enemies of the 7th order and beyond, Lu Yi decided that they should avoid crossing paths with any if able. That would leave 8th and 9th orders untouchable. All 3 of them would never be able to defeat one, even on their best days. The difference was just too great, but so long as ample arrangements had been set in place, Lu Yi was at least sure that they would be able to escape unscathed. It was the moment when he realized that he was #1 on the Carnage roster, plus the rendezvous with Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan, that the embers of his ambition were lit. Even so, Lu Yi understood fully how risky and dangerous this daring do was going to be and how they needed to be extremely careful moving forward. So, you're thinking of going for the top spot, brother? Li Baxin's brows peaked with apparent exhilaration. It would have been a fool's errand if the situation were otherwise, but with him now already in first place with such a huge lead, it seemed realistic. All they had to do was defend and maintain their lead until the end of the Colosseum. So be it then, brother. If winning this Colosseum is what you wish, said Li Baxin with enthusiasm, then both Yuechan and I will give you all the help you need. Well, for starters, I'd need your help watching the place while I fashion more ward flags. He might have just obtained a fresh supply of ward flags from the belongings of the poor ward cultivator he had slain, but it wouldn't be enough. With full anticipation of pandemonium, especially since all three of them were weaker in comparison to other contestants of the Colosseum, he would need even more ward flags to create some insurance. Only with enough ward flags could he construct more magical wards, which would be critical for his plan to work and to ensure everyone's safety. Which was the paramount concern of all, since champions and elites of the 8th and 9th Order teamed the vast length and width of the Colosseum. The materials that he had bought from the Divine Trade Association were still plenty. He could still forge several hundred ward flags with them. But the process would involve the emission of spiritual power, and that might invite unwanted attention. To that end, Lu Yi had to construct another magical ward, one with the express purpose of masking any spiritual power signature. So long as he could keep the emissions to a minimum, they would be able to stay undetected. Time passed slowly as Lu Yi went to work with Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan resting and recuperating while they stood vigil. The materials depleted quickly enough, and the ward flags grew from stacks into heaps and into mounds. In the meantime, the carnage outside never stopped. Champions and elites waged war on each other, doing their best to improve their ranks on the carnage roster. That included Xia Liang, currently the roster's number 2 and a champion of the Raving Bladesmen who had ascended into the Cloud River realm with 360 spiritual points unlocked. He was unequivocally and undeniably the most dangerous cultivator in the Colosseum. He was outscored by Lu Yi when the Carnage roster first appeared, although he quickly caught up and locked the first place up by killing and maiming nonstop until Lu Yi overtook him again, this time by a mile because of the 1,000 Carnage points increment, and left him in the second place for good. Xia Liang had never felt so humiliated and exasperated before. If he had been suspecting that the Lu Yi in the first place could be the rumored Lu Yi of the Crimson Blood sect, he was definitely sure of it now. The 1,000 Carnage point increment was all the proof Xia Liang needed to be sure that Lu Yi wasn't a high-tier Cloud River realm cultivator. This matched all the information he had received about the young Crimson Blood sect acolyte, although he could not yet explain how Lu Yi had succeeded in holding on to the special gold amulet for the whole 24 hours. He had been actively scouring the Colosseum for signs of Lu Yi, but his search had yet to turn up anything useful. The vastness of the Colosseum's area was not as big as he feared, however, it was still wide enough for anyone to hide unless he had the means to pinpoint his quarry. At any rate, Xia Liang was certain that Lu Yi was weaker than him. The skulking weakling must be cowering somewhere, hiding like a rodent in its lair. Which was true. For one day and night, Lu Ye's Carnage points remained unchanged at 1,790, while his had risen up to 1,600. Just a few more kills and he would catch up and regain the top spot. Chapter 512, The Hunt. Lu Yi was finally ready. So were Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan. With tons worth of ward flags sitting in mountains inside the subterranean cavern, they were ready to rumble. They stood up together. Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan both extracted something together and slapped it on their faces. Lu Yi looked. Face masks. Li Baxian's was a rosy-lipped and ivory-teethed mask of a boy grinning, whilst Feng Yuechan's was one depicting a tearful girl with a mourning and baleful expression. Li Baxian extracted and offered one more to Lu Yi. Here, take this one. Makes it easier for us to operate. Without a word, Lu Yi retrieved from inside his storage sphere a face mask with the visage of a hideous and fanged demon and put it on. Li Baxian was surprised, but he quickly burst into a giggle. I see. You've come prepared. All three of them were being targeted by cultivators of the Thousand Demon Ridge. It was only natural and expected that all three of them would share the same idea of preparing enough face masks for their own use. They got out of the cave and kept their spiritual power signatures low, then they chose a bearing and headed that way. Their motive might be to secure Lu Ye's lead on the first place of the Carnage roster, but safety remained their first and foremost concern, meaning that they would be operating within range of this cave. If anything were to happen, this cave would be the point where they would retreat. Too far and they might not be able to make it back here safely. That way, They could fall back to the cave if they encountered enemies beyond their ability to defeat and use the teleportation wards to escape. Hence, the ideal range would be 10 to a dozen miles. But that would greatly limit the scope of their operations. They could only wait for potential targets to pass by instead of launching attacks on others freely. Lu Yi had shared his ideas of sticking within range of the cave with Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan prior to setting off, and they agreed to the idea. While they could plead guilty to feeling enticed by the prizes of winning first place, they acknowledged the soundness of his idea that safety would remain their paramount concern. Launching attacks might provide a lot of initiative, but it could also be risky all the same. But now that they had formulated a plan, all they needed to do was stick to it. They stopped a quarter of an hour later, hardly 20 miles away from the cave. Lu Yi studied the surroundings and gave a couple of curt nods to Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan. There was no need for further communication. The latter two sped away in different directions where they would maintain a perimeter. At the same time, Yi materialized and headed in a third direction, doing the same. Alone, Lu Yi extracted his ward flags one after another and began constructing a magical ward. He was going to build wards not for killing but for restraining enemies. That could buy them some time while they escaped if they were to encounter anyone too powerful or dangerous. The ward would be manually activated, not automatically triggered. That would ensure that it could be used to its greatest effect at the right moment. Every now and then, elite cultivators might zip by overhead. But thanks to the perimeter maintained by the others, the early warning they provided allowed Lu Yi to keep himself invisible to prevent detection. Constructing the magical wards took 2 hours. With the preparations now completed, everyone waited in hiding. It had been 3 days since the Carnage Coliseum first opened and many cultivators had chosen to band up and move around in groups. Despite receiving fewer rewards individually, this could at least provide greater protection. Those who still roamed around alone were at least 7th Orders. Confident enough about themselves, only they could move around alone without fear of being in danger. Silence pervaded the forest where they remained patiently in waiting. High up in the sky, changes never stopped occurring to the blood-red pennant that was the Carnage roster, with Xia Liang swiftly and steadily raking in spades after spades of Carnage points in his race to the top. At his current pace, it would not be long before he caught up with Lu Yi and overtook him. 2 hours turned into 4. The idle vigil remained a fruitless, if futile wait. They sat on pins and needles as the waiting game became a frustrating and seemingly endless ordeal. There were still a huge number of cultivators around, but the vastness of the Colosseum made everyone scatter, especially with the need to maintain caution. Hardly anyone was eager to reveal themselves. More so, ghost cultivators who flit from hither to thither unseen and unnoticed. All of a sudden, a flicker of light crept into his sight. Lu Yi panned his gaze that way, and there it was, a tiny speck of white light bobbing lazily just under a tree not far away from his position. He was sure that it was not there moments ago. It had just appeared. Just like that. And he knew what it was. That had to be another one of those prizes that the heavens scatter all around the Colosseum every now and then, an endowment. He had encountered one before which gave him a white amulet. So this is how endowments appear, Lu Yi realized, gaining a deeper understanding of how cruel and callous the enigmatic entity, the heavens, could be. Every day, the heavens would select a person and bestow them a golden amulet. Every day, the token of providence spectacle, another contrivance of the heavens, would take place to distribute amulets to anyone nearby. Aside from all those events were also random endowments like this, to say nothing of the Carnage roster that hung high up in the sky for everyone to see. All these events existed only for one reason, to incite skirmishes and conflicts amongst all cultivators in the vicinity. The heavens were like an invisible hand, prodding the cultivators so that more blood could be spilled everywhere in the Colosseum. "Brother," Li Baxian's message came suddenly. "Yeah, I saw it," Lu Yi responded. What was initially a futile wait had just changed into a real hunt, despite his earlier concern that this was going to be a fruitless wild goose chase. And true enough, merely a few minutes later, Lu Yi spied 4 figures appearing in the distance. Carefully and meticulously, The four had separated into groups of two that approached from two different directions. But without the abilities unique only to ghost cultivators, they could not fully mask their tracks. Keeping their spiritual power signatures as low as possible was pretty much everything they could do. Patiently, these strangers did not make a beeline straight for the white speck of light. Instead, they moved inward very slowly as if they were scanning for booby traps. The strangers would have discovered Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan with such cautious methods. But fortunately, Lu Yi had earlier constructed magical wards that could mask their spiritual power signatures to a great extent that so long as the enemies did not have extraordinarily acute spiritual senses, they would not be detected. With glyph concealment, Lu Yi himself was as undetectable as a ghost cultivator. Two of them passed just 10 meters away from Lu Ye's position without noticing anything while the remaining two were heading straight towards Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan's position. "I'm gonna make the first strike, brother," Li Baxian communicated again. Lu Yi did not respond. He was not at all perturbed by the number of enemies. That these enemies operated in a group indicated a certain possibility that they might not be high-tier cultivators. If anything, Lu Yi would be more worried if it were just a lone cultivator who came. A flash of light slashed through the gloomy dimness of the jungle, followed closely by a piercing ring of steel as Li Baxian broke cover. More than a dozen shafts of light hovered in the air like a bunch of swarming wasps and, as one, they barreled straight after one of the strangers. The sudden attack caught all four strangers unaware, the ones heading towards Li Baxian most of all. Their faces fell with shock and awe that gripped them. Right in that second, their hair stood on end as they felt danger. True and overwhelming danger. One of them cried, "Ambush!" Every one of them produced their weapons and brandished them at the massing shafts of light streaking towards them. There was no telling to which faction the four strangers belonged. But Li Baxian, after his long years of experience as a sword cultivator, could freely control his many shafts of light as if they were the very digits on his hand, and he could stop them before committing any mistakes the moment he realized who they were. Which happened fast enough. The moment the skirmish broke out, he saw who they were. If they were Grand Sky Coalition allies, Li Baxian would immediately stand down. But if they were Thousand Demon Ridge enemies, then the initiative could ensure that he could at least cut down one opponent in the first exchange itself. The moment the word "ambush" left the stranger's lips, the truth was revealed. Both red and blue blazed brightly in the gloominess of the jungle. Launching the attack was hardly the only thing Li Baxian was doing. Looking and observing, he was trying to make out the ranks of the four strangers. The sudden ambush would have easily rattled them enough to display their power fully. And he was right, there was nothing for him to be afraid of. The two strangers, one a fifth order and the other a fourth order, were minor threats to him. The pair near Lu Ye's position sprang into action. One of them, a burly and tall mountain of a man whose girth suggested that he could be a body-tempering cultivator, began to race to the aid of his comrades. The other one, presumably a spell cultivator, began channeling his spiritual power. The body-tempering cultivator had barely reached far enough when he was greeted by an astonishing sight. A barrage of more than a dozen sword-like shafts of searing white incandescence had rained down on his comrades and had failed to kill them, but more were homing in on them. Li Baxian had gone easy on the first exchange. After all, he needed to ascertain if the four strangers could be Grand Sky Coalition allies. But once he made sure, he unleashed more, and he was still far from reaching his limit. Li Baxian could already conjure and control up to 100 shafts of light back when he was still in the Spirit Creek realm. Reaching the fourth order of the Cloud River realm meant that his bar had risen. Sword cultivators have always been known for their aptitude in killing, and unless his opponents were at least 2 ranks beyond his, few could possibly withstand Li Baxian's wrath. The radiance of the multitudinous bolts of light illuminated the dimness of the jungle as they ripped through the 2 enemy cultivators' protective aura, perforating them like a sieve with blood streaming out of every wound they rendered. The gaps between ranks within the Cloud River realm were as huge as a canyon. Both enemy cultivators were at least fully fledged 4th and 5th orders, but all that meant nothing in the face of Li Baxian's skill and experience. In just one exchange, 1 4th order and 1 5th order were nearly dead. In fact, Li Baxi would have been able to slay them all outright if not for the fact that he was intentionally keeping them alive, or half-dead, for Lu Yi. The body-tempering cultivator who was on his way towards his comrades could feel his blood curdling the moment the sight of them crashing to the ground and the grinning boy mask panning towards him hit him. Deep down inside, he grappled with panic at facing off against such a formidable opponent. His legs stopped moving, not realizing that he had just involuntarily become a sitting duck. A thunderbolt came out of nowhere, whipping him and nearly knocking him to the ground. He jerked his head sideways and there was a female to his flank not far away, wearing the mask of a tearful girl, obviously the pair of the man in the grinning boy mask just now. There's more than one ambush here, he realized. The body-tempering cultivator was panicking. Behind him, his spell cultivator colleague howled, "Run!" The spell cultivator had only just finished channeling his power and was ready to charge when he saw first his two colleagues being cut down like a tornado tearing through a town before seeing the body-tempering cultivator being pummeled by another spell. That was enough reason for him to turn tail and flee. Hurling his spell straight at Feng Yuechan, he channeled another surge of spiritual power and took into the air to escape. But he did not manage to fly high enough. His feet were barely 1 foot over the ground when a massive force crashed into him from above before he felt the bite of steel gnawing through his flesh and bone. The fiery red glimmer of the steel blasted apart the protective aura that bristled the surface of the spell cultivator's skin, slicing through his sinews and crunching through his bones down the length of his back. He crashed to the ground a lifeless cadaver. He did not notice that there was someone waiting to strike from behind. Chapter 513, Having a Go at Me. Li Baxi and Feng Yuechan's ambush had taken up all of the enemy cultivator's attention and the enemy spell cultivator did not notice another opponent behind him. By the time Lu Yi had delivered his blow, it was too late. He instantly crashed to the ground after barely taking flight. The impact left him breathless and dizzy for a second before he saw the glint of steel descending down on him. Frantically, the spell cultivator channeled his spiritual power and summoned his protective aura only to watch it shatter 3 seconds after it materialized by the blow falling on his head. The air was rent with the sound of steel as the spell cultivator bore the brunt of the blows falling in interweaving flurries. The loud impacts echoed as the spell cultivator's entire form trembled and convulsed under the weight of the onslaught. The protective aura's integrity ultimately crumbled under the relentless assault, leaving him exposed and open to the next barrage of steel that easily ripped him apart, body and soul. With his vision and life slowly ebbing away, the spell cultivator collapsed. Lu Yi raced to rejoin the others. Feng Yuechan had not stopped firing spell after spell at the body-tempering cultivator to keep him busy while Li Baxian's profuse shafts of light soared around like a tempest, preventing the incapacitated enemy cultivators from being rescued. With a wave of his hand, the shafts of light withdrew the moment he saw Lu Yi speedily approaching, and he directed them at the enemy body-tempering cultivator. The pair of heavily wounded cultivators had not even exhaled with relief when Lu Yi was already upon them. All it took was a couple of swishes and the two men crumpled to the floor, as dead as a pair of doornails. Lu Yi would not have been able to dispatch them both with such ease if it were under normal circumstances. Both a 4th and 5th order could easily give him a hard time. It was Li Baxian's successful ambush that had incapacitated them badly enough for anyone or even an ordinary 3rd order to deliver the final coup de grace. With the two finally dealt with, Lu Yi rejoined the others in dealing with the final enemy remaining, the body-tempering cultivator. Mere seconds had passed since Feng Yuechan engaged the body-tempering cultivator and the addition of Li Baxi into the fray had left the enemy cultivator littered with wounds all over him. The burly enemy failed to keep up with the intensity and speed of the swarming shafts of light and Feng Yuechan's spells were not making things easier. One after another, the spells hammered into him like a battering ram that the shield spirit artifact that he was using had long been knocked out of his grasp. But with Lu Yi joining in, his fate was as sealed as a fully nailed coffin. Seconds later, the giant body-tempering cultivator of a man crashed to the ground. Lu Yi bolted after the speck of white light still bobbing in midair and thrust his hand into it. He felt his fingers closing in on something solid and seized it. Then he raced around to collect the ward flags that he had placed around the site of the battle without even a look at what he had retrieved from the white light of the endowment. In the meantime, Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan cleared up the dead bodies and stripped them of anything useful. "Let's go!" Lu Yi called everyone. All three of them hurried back to the cave. To remain safe would mean that they should not dawdle at the site of the battle. The skirmish might have been a short one, but the commotion it caused could have attracted the attention of anyone, or any enemies, nearby. Fighting and moving like that might be a big hassle, but it was the safer way. A quarter of an hour later, everyone was back inside the cave, seated on the ground. "I've taken a look at the Carnage roster, brother. The increase of Carnage points on the first name is the same as what you should be getting after those kills. I guess that means that it really is you," said Li Baxian. That was true. Lu Yi had taken a quick peek at the Carnage roster himself on the way back here. The 4 enemies that he had slain, 3 5th orders and 1 4th order, should garner him 430 Carnage points. Since the number tallied with the gain of Carnage points on the leading Lu Yi name at the first place of the roster, that would mean that it really was him. That was a very rewarding attempt. Most high-tier cultivators, including the second-placed Xia Liang, could only rake in 500 Carnage points on average every day. Yet in one skirmish alone, Lu Yi had gotten more than 400 points. An amount that almost caught up to what Xia Liang could earn in one day. Xia Liang's Carnage points total was so close to catching up with Lu Yi at first. One could almost guess how Xia Liang would react when he saw himself being further down in the list again. Never before in the history of the Carnage Colosseum since its inception where a 3rd order, not even anyone below the 7th order, managed to stay so comfortably at the first place of the Carnage roster. The usual contenders that led at the first 3 spots of the Carnage rosters were usually 8th, if not 9th orders. In fact, most of the time the top 3 spots were usually occupied by 9th orders. While there have been champions who had tried using the handicap to have a low-tier cultivator rake in as many kills as possible to win more points, to really pull off such a trick was easier said than done. To capitalize on the advantage offered by the handicap, certain conditions had to be met, the foremost being that the cultivator concerned must not exceed the 5th order, as the increments gained beyond this point would be too low to warrant any significant benefit. To say nothing of the unexpected incidents that could be potentially disastrous, even with a 5th order piggybacking a 9th order. Most 9th orders got into fights involving at least one or more 9th orders from the opposing faction. That would mean that the 9th order would not be able to properly provide enough protection for his or her weaker partner, especially during a very fierce battle. If anything were to happen to the weaker partner, the Carnage points that had been accumulated would be lost, making the whole endeavor a fool's errand. If not for Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan's arrival, plus that unique gold amulet event the reward of which had propelled him to the top of the Carnage roster and provided him with a sound basis for this adventurous undertaking, Lu Yi would not have conceived the idea of wanting to contest for the first prize. He would rather hide somewhere safe and wait until the Colosseum ended. Everyone laid the booty they had collected on the ground before Lu Yi so that he could undo the magical seal of the storage bags. Undoing the seals had now become as easy as drawing inviolable from its sheath. It took just a few moments for him to finish opening all of the storage bags, which he divided into 3 portions. 2 of these portions he handed to Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan. Next, he emptied the bags of their contents. This time, there wasn't anything valuable. It was time he had a look at whatever it was he got from the endowment speck of light. He had grabbed it and stuffed it into his storage sphere in his haste to vacate the site of the battle earlier. But when he took it out, to his surprise, it was a flower. A magical flower. The last time he got something from an endowment like this, it yielded a white amulet. But his guess was spot on. The endowments that scattered all over the Colosseum really did come in various types, shapes, and sizes. Lu Yi knew little about medicine and herbs, hence he could not tell what kind of magical flower it was or what its properties and medicinal functions were. Right now, he could only surmise that it wasn't anything rare or precious. But whatever it was, it could wait until he had the chance to meet Shui Yuan and hand it to her. It was to Lu Ye's favor that the wait wasn't too long and the battle ended quickly. Lu Yi and his companions were not yet spent, but they decided to wait out inside the cave for another couple of hours to make sure that the earlier battle had not attracted the focus of anyone dangerous. When the wait was finally up, they stepped out of the cave. They headed for more than a dozen miles in another direction until they found a spot where Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan split off again like the last time to allow Lu Yi to begin setting up his magical ward. Once the trap was ready, they waited to spring their trap. Last time, success only came because of the sudden appearance of that endowment. It attracted a bunch of 1,000 Demon Ridge cultivators that ultimately became their prey. But this time, they waited for more than a day and a night. Many cultivators had passed by their hiding spot, but every one of them was at least 7th orders and above, which Lu Yi and his companions would rather give a wide berth. It was almost evening when they finally saw a group of 3 passing by. Li Baxian revealed himself first to draw their attention. But when he attacked, he realized that his battlefield imprint did not have any reaction at all. He immediately withdrew his attack, much to the panic and surprise of all 3 strangers, although they quickly realized that this was just a big misunderstanding. They were allied cultivators from Grand Sky Coalition. Now that their affiliations had been made clear, there was no reason to involve any hostilities. Li Baxian had a quick talk with them to explain everything, and the 3 scurried away at once. Hence the wait went on. There was no telling if any more prey would wander this way, and if there were, they could be members of the Grand Sky Coalition, which was a question where the answer would be revealed only during an attack on the prey. Nevertheless, both Li Baxian and Lu Yi did not grow weary or restless at all. They understood very well that right now, here in the large expanse of the Colosseum, their cultivation remained their single most glaring weakness. 3rd and 4th orders were the flesh that the strong feasted on. Hence, to make sure that their safety was ensured, patience and fortitude were crucial elements to their plan. Hours passed before another group of 3 passed by. Li Baxian spearheaded the ambush again, and this time, his battlefield imprint throbbed. It glowed bright and blue whilst the imprints of the 3 blazed with a fiery red luminescence. The marauders reaped success. Li Baxian badly injured one while wounding the remaining 2 in the first contact, and by the time Feng Yuechan joined in the fight, the victory was sealed. This also proved Lu Ye's earlier hypothesis that most low-tier cultivators traveled in groups. Those of the 7th order and beyond usually operated alone. The 3,000 Demon Ridge cultivators were all 5th orders, and the combined element of surprise by both Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan easily trampled whatever defense they attempted in their moment of desperation. All Lu Yi had to do during the gritting battle was maintain his cover and stealthily join in. At the end of the battle, all that was left were 3 dead bodies reeking of blood and success, which had translated to a 360 carnage points increment. Somewhere far away, Xia Liang lifted his head to look at the carnage roster, and what he saw struck such disbelief into him that the corners of his eyes throbbed. Is that Lu Yi having a go at me? He had been feeling that way since Lu Yi had raked in 1,000 carnage points and dethroned him from the first spot. He had been roaming far and wide lately, looking for any Grand Sky Coalition cultivators he could sink his blade into to garner more carnage points. Every day, he had been rushing to catch up to Lu Yi, but just when he thought he was going to overtake Lu Yi, the latter would suddenly gain several hundred carnage points, casting him further behind once again. Just when the gap between their carnage points was only 100 or so, it turned into 400 plus again. Damn you! Xia Liang cursed quietly. But that was not all. As if he was not annoyed and frustrated enough, there was one more problem on his plate. A Grand Sky Coalition 9th Order had been hunting and harassing him. The unknown 9th Order wasn't high up on the carnage roster, he was somewhere in the teens. Lacking enough luck, his chance of getting within the top 3 places was steadily slipping out of sight. Therefore, this unknown 9th Order had abandoned his earlier vocation and had somehow devoted himself to harassing and sabotaging Xia Liang, all the while keeping himself unseen as he kept closely behind the raving bladesman champion. Xia Liang would have easily defeated the 9th Order if it were open combat. But this mysterious 9th Order was smart enough to employ guerrilla tactics that even he could barely find a way around, and that annoyed him immensely. That was 1,000 carnage points ahead of second-place Tan Sheng, who was still eating the dust of Lu Ye's unstoppable lead. Tan Sheng's chances of catching up were feeling more like a mirage in the desert by the minute. Next second, he caught sight of a bolt of light streaking this way. In the blink of an eye, it reached their position and the light made a sharp swerve and landed right in front of them. Lu Ye's eyes contracted with shock. Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan tensed up warily, expecting the worst. The battlefield imprints on their hands flickered with a bright blue illumination. On the stranger's hand, they spied the scarlet-red glow blazing conspicuously. The huge pressure of facing off against a formidable enemy petrified them all as if they had been hit by an electric jolt. For Lu Yi recognized who it was. It was the same enemy he saw Xia Qianqian fighting back then. He did not know his name then, and he still didn't know his name now. But he did know that this enemy was a ninth order. Far too many times they had tempted fate, and finally, woe had descended upon them, both suddenly and jarringly. Clearly, the commotion from the last fight had drawn him here. Standing side by side, Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan quietly channeled their power in preparation to strike. A similarly grim-faced Lu Yi, too, barely moved an inch. None of them would dare to break the stillness so long as Wei Kei remained motionless. Wei Kei panned his gaze around. He surveyed Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan, then he returned his gaze to Lu Yi. All he saw were 3 different masks staring back at him. But amber perched on Lu Ye's shoulder was all the proof he needed. Cracking a grin, he exclaimed, "Found you at last." He was absolutely elated. For days he had been hunting for Lu Yi to no avail, and fate had finally decided to reward his determination and resolve by putting Lu Yi right before him. Imagine ranging across lands hundreds of thousands of miles in length and combing through so many cultivators, all for one particular individual. From the carnage roster, he had deduced that Lu Yi had not been idle at all. The daily gain of several hundred carnage points had been proof enough. In the meantime, he too had been busy. As a ninth order who preferred operating alone like the rest of his ilk, he had roamed everywhere, found his fair share of endowment rewards, and participated in several token of providence events, all of which have been tremendously fruitful even though he had not devoted himself to earning carnage points. His name was somewhere in the late teens at present. One might as well argue that Wei Kei had little ambition in competing for a good place on the carnage roster. Hunting down Lu Yi and slaying him had been his prime purpose. Though the rewards of winning the top spot on the carnage roster were undeniably enticing, they barely came close to beating the combined bounty offered by all 1,000 Demon Ridge sects and orders for Lu Ye's head. The amount of supplies that he would receive for Lu Ye's head was just too good, so good that he wondered that it might even outlast his entire lifetime. Hence, since the beginning, his target had always been Lu Yi. He was just passing by in the vicinity when the violent emission of spiritual power signatures from the battle caught his attention. Little did he expect that his curious move of coming over to have a look would result in him stumbling upon the very person he had been combing the Colosseum for. The face mask was different, but amber, plus inviolable now still in Lu Ye's grasp, were all the signs Wei Kei needed to confirm Lu Ye's identity. As soon as he finished speaking, Wei Kei immediately fired a spell. It was a spell fired casually by the 1,000 Demon Ridge Ninth Order. But even an arbitrary attack like that was deadly enough for Lu Yi. Before it even took form, it screamed through the air, and by the time it materialized as a full-fledged projectile of spiritual power, it was mere feet away from Lu Yi. The latter frantically mustered his power, and the luminescent shield of glyph protection came into shape before him. The air wailed. Several shafts of light slammed in rapid succession into the spell's projectile, trying to whittle down its force. Li Baxian had realized that the attack was not one that Lu Yi would be able to take, hence he chose to protect Lu Yi instead of attacking Wei Quebec. But he was not the only one, even Feng Yuechan helped as well. Nevertheless, their combined efforts had not been able to fully defeat the spell in its entirety. With a bang, the eruption of force when the bolt hit and shattered the glyph protection shield, knocking Lu Yi into the air, and he crashed to the ground. Wei Kei snorted coldly as he waved his hand at the directions of Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan. Luminescent lines appeared in midair, joining and intersecting quickly to form a huge round disc pulsing with rich spiritual power. The disc released invisible blades of wind howling through the air and slashed straight at Li Baxin and Feng Yuechun. He had intentionally dialed down the strength of his attack on Lu Yi. The last thing he needed was a fully unrecognizable corpse. Lu Ye's head needed to be intact for him to claim his bounty. As for Li Baxin and Feng Yuechun, there was no need to hold back at all. The many shafts of light surged in torrents back to Li Baxin, forming a wide wall of swords in front of him, while Feng Yuechun worked her magic and mists rose, coagulating into a gigantic golem towering 10 meters over her. But the wind blades easily blasted through the cloud giant and it burst into a shapeless mass of dissipating mists while Li Baxin's wall of swords shattered into splinters after just a split second of resistance. Right before they were in any danger, Feng Yuechun conjured her umbrella-shaped spirit artifact. The object radiated a burst of spiritual power the moment it opened, forming an energy shield that managed to withstand the deadly onslaught that slammed in successive barrages on the shield. A spell artifact? Wei Kei gasped, recognizing the magical umbrella for what it was. At the same time, he started to wonder about Feng Yuechun's identity. A Cloud River Realm cultivator armed with a spell artifact must make her a very special individual. Deep inside, he was doubled over with glee. He could thank the stars for not only finding Lu Yi but also two prey who would ensure a future of plenty and abundance. First and foremost, Lu Yi. Ignoring Li Baxin and Feng Yuechun, Wei Kei lunged forward, homing in on his main prize Lu Yi. As a spell cultivator, he should be maintaining his distance from his opponents. Yet he was confident, being 6 ranks above Lu Yi, and he wanted to prevent causing too much damage and blowing Lu Yi to pieces. Hence, he decided to stay close and do whatever he could to incapacitate Lu Yi. Yet his advance did not even reach 50 meters when Lu Yi leaped into the air. Wei Kei spied the ward flag in his grasp, something Lu Yi was not holding earlier, and Lu Yi began waving it furiously. A deafening hum rang like a bell's toll, and sheets of light rose up instantaneously around him, forming a dome more than dozens of meters wide. Wei Kei did not see this coming at all, and there he was, trapped inside the dome of light. A magical ward. Wei Kei muttered a curse under his breath. He did not expect a magical ward, least of all a trap ward. Oh, I cannot let Lu Yi escape. His hand shot up and he fired an aurid bolt of light straight at where Lu Yi. Only, Lu Yi was long gone. He had escaped from the ward's area the moment he activated it, exiting unimpeded with his ward flag while the golden energy bolt smacked harmlessly into the wall of light that came up just in time and leaving an inconsequential ripple sweeping across its surface. This trap ward looked very similar to a defensive ward, although they were essentially different. Cultivators inside a defensive ward were safe from attacks from the outside. But unlike defensive wards, trap wards prevented damage from the inside reaching the outside, effectively keeping any cultivators caught inside fully confined so long as the ward still existed. All in all, defensive wards were to prevent external attacks while trap wards were to prevent attacks from within. Few would have been able to tell the difference at first glance despite their stark contrast. To escape a trap ward, one had to destroy the ward. And as the caster of the ward, Lu Yi, with the ward flag with him, could move in and out of the ward freely. This was the root of the confidence that compelled him to compete for the first spot on the Carnage roster despite being a third order. With the assistance of Li Baxin and Feng Yuechun, Lu Yi had nothing to be afraid of when dealing with other Cloud River Realm cultivators of mediocre strength and power. Even when they were faced with enemies too dangerous and formidable, they could rely on trap wards to buy them enough time to escape. Time which would ensure a safe flight away from the scene of battle. By the time the trap ward was revealed, Li Baxin and Feng Yuechun had already taken to the sky and sped away as fast as they could. Lu Yi might have had a later start, but with glyphs, wings and windwalk both activated, he demonstrated speed that outstripped even Li Baxin and caught up to them soon enough. Inside the trap ward, Wei Kei could only watch Lu Yi fleeing with frustration and resentment. He was so close to killing Lu Yi and achieving a life of wealth and prosperity. With his spiritual power mustered, he fired spell after spell at the glowing walls of light around him, eliciting an endless symphony of ripples that spread across the trap ward's dome-like shield as its brightness gradually waned. But the thunderous emission of spiritual power from the relentless slew of spells only served to remind Lu Yi and his companions to hasten. The trap ward might have worked nicely, but they were well aware that it would only hold for a short period of time. The exact duration would depend on what Wei Kei could do to defeat the ward and free himself. Chapter 5:15. A string of unfortunate events. Huge energy blasts never stopped hammering at the luminescent walls of the trap ward. Waves and waves of spiritual power emissions surged from inside, and the brightness of the walls was growing dimmer at speeds that the naked eye could see. Lu Yi had employed 8 ward keystones and several more flags for this trap ward, but it was just a hastily constructed magical ward that was subsistent on spirit stones, making it mediocre at best. The strength of a magical ward had everything to do with both the amounts of spiritual power stored in the ward and the richness of ambient spiritual qi in the atmosphere. The more spiritual power was used in the ward and the richer the ambient spiritual qi in the air around it was, the stronger and more potent the magical ward would be. That would make newly constructed wards weakest because they had not yet been able to draw enough spiritual qi from the atmosphere, with or without the addition of spirit stones. With time, a magical ward would store enough spiritual power to allow its potency to grow to its peak. The biggest advantage of this particular trap ward that Lu Yi had constructed was its smaller range of barely 60 meters. That had helped to enhance its strength. Nevertheless, it would take more than that to fully thwart a Cloud River Realm 9th Order like Wei Quebec. In less than 20 seconds, the glow of the dome of the trap ward turned fully dark before it finally shattered. Liberated from his temporary confinement, Wei Kei took to the sky and began streaking towards where Lu Yi and the others had vanished. He could not allow this chance to slip past his fingers. It was only luck that he had managed to stumble into Lu Yi, and this chance could never come by again. But as far as Wei Kei was concerned, he was confident. The bunch of 3rd and 4th orders might have fled, but even a 20-second head start wouldn't prevent him from catching up. He gazed into the distance and spied a few sparkles of light in the distance, recognizing his fleeing quarry. Channeling his power, Wei Kei turned into a streaking shooting star himself to give chase. At the same time, Lu Yi jerked his head around. He had felt a dangerous presence incoming, and seeing a speck of light in the distance coming their way, he knew that Wei Kei had managed to free himself from the trap ward. But it was as he had expected. The trap ward that he had constructed could only delay a 9th order for 20 seconds at most. Nevertheless, that was all the time he needed. All 3 of them ignored the imminent threat and focused on gaining as much speed as possible, flying quickly and covering more than a dozen miles before they finally arrived at their destination. They landed just outside the cave and dashed inside, making for its innermost caverns, where they stood together in the teleportation ward and activated it. The lines of the magical ward shone with a sudden radiance, a magical glow that traced every single line of the ward while illuminating the rock chamber. Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan could only watch with awe and surprise. They had used the divine opportunity column to travel, but never anything like this, hence the fresh and new experience. The well-seasoned amber lifted both its paws and wrapped them around Lu Ye's neck, its citron eyes palpitating with anticipation. As the teleportation ward began operating, Lu Yi ripped Inviolable out of its sheath, sending a glowing scythe that darted towards the spot where the explosive wards were. A deafening bang rocked the entire cave amid an eruption of searing flames and blinding brilliance that caused rocks and debris to crash down from the ceiling. By the time the tumult died down, the place had turned into utter chaos. Wei Kei arrived 10 seconds later, rushing into the cave hurriedly. But Lu Yi and the others were long gone. All he could find were broken rocks strewn everywhere. "Where the hell are they?" Wei Kei gasped to himself, his face fraught with consternation. He was positively certain that Lu Yi and his companions had landed here just now. He had seen them entering this cave when he was still in the air before a thunderous explosion ensued. Yet when he came in here, all of them had vanished. Finding that unbelievable, he searched the place, going even to the deepest most recesses of the cave system and ultimately finding a dead end. Still, he could not find the slightest hints of his quarry's whereabouts. 1 minute ago, they were all here, and yet they were all gone. Wei Kei hastily left the cave. He peered around for a few seconds before he determined a bearing and soared into the air in that direction, still unable to come to terms with Lu Yi and his companion's disappearing act. They must be somewhere nearby, he thought, and I must find them. Meanwhile, inside another subterranean cavern more than 100 meters underground 200 miles away, the unseen lines of the teleportation ward traced on the ground came alive with a sudden dazzling and intense incandescence. The air around the ward warped and 3 figures materialized almost miraculously. The moment their feet hit solid ground, Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan staggered so unsteadily that they nearly fell, their faces sickly pale and aghast. None of them were hurt during the encounter with Wei Quebec. But it was the terrifying sensation of having nothing under their feet during the magical conveyance here that had them both feeling as if they had been thrust down a bottomless abyss. It felt so real and vivid. But more importantly, neither of them knew if they should be channeling their spiritual power with fear that it might disrupt the conveyance process, despite how being unready greatly unsettled them. Especially when what seemed like a split-second process felt more like an eternal and precipitous descent into a bottomless pit to them. Now they understood why Amber clutched onto Lu Yi as soon as the conveyance process began. It must have learned from the many times it traveled all around the Colosseum with Lu Yi. But before they could fully recover from the ordeal of the process, the bluish glow from the back of their hands illuminated the jagged and rough surface of the cave floor. Still within the circle of the teleportation ward, all 3 of them tensed warily. That their battlefield imprints were reacting in unison would mean that they were not alone, and whoever was nearby, he or she must be a cultivator of the Thousand Demon Ridge. With their innate and remarkable senses, they noticed there really was someone nearby. Just a little more than 50 meters away, He Bing was sitting alone on the ground, recuperating quietly. He came to this cave just 4 hours ago, and after making sure that this place was empty, he had decided to stop and rest there. He had no companion, and as with all other Seventh Orders, he was at an impasse. Being alone basically precluded him from being able to compete for a good position on the Carnage roster. Getting on the roster was doable, but he didn't expect that he would be high enough to win anything worth the trouble. Therefore, he chose to focus his efforts on the Token of Providence events as well as all other endowments that appeared all over the Colosseum. At times, he would be lucky enough to stumble upon weaker Grand Sky Coalition cultivators whom he could kill and get a good haul from the loot. At times, when fate wished to test him, he would be faced with opponents he could barely defeat. Nevertheless, as Seventh Orders, escaping unscathed from enemy 8th and 9th Orders remained possible. He Bing would not have chosen to operate alone if he was not confident enough in his abilities and strength. He was just having a moment of solitude in the peacefulness of the cave when the darkness within was broken. It was a magical ward, and before he could comprehend what was going on, 3 figures appeared within it. He Bing's eyes went wide. What the hell? How did these 3 people just come out of nowhere like that? But he quickly collected himself and his brow cocked with interest. He had understood something. These 3 people must have used some sort of teleportation ward. That must be what the glowing lines that appeared were. But a Cloud River Realm cultivator skilled enough to construct something as complex as a teleportation ward? Interesting. He Bing gradually rose to his feet. It was Lu Yi who saw He Bing first, and he cursed quietly to himself. The enemy was alone, and the timing could not have been any worse for them to encounter a lone wolf right here and now. There was no telling what rank the stranger was, but he must be at least a 7th Order. He could still remember the last time he was surprised by the presence of a Thousand Demon Ridge enemy during his escape using a teleportation ward, and he certainly did not expect it to happen again so soon. But as much as he was surprised, it wasn't incomprehensible. If he had found this cave, then anyone could find it too. From his initial posture, the stranger looked like he was just here for a rest, although there was no telling how long he had been here. Lu Yi was lucky last time that his opponent wasn't too powerful, and with Yi Yi's help, he had defeated him and survived. But whether or not he would repeat that feat again today remained to be seen. He could only hope that the enemy was not an 8th, or even a 9th order, or they would be dead meat. Hence, the same moment Bing rose to his feet, Lu Yi wildly willed his teleportation ward to activate once more to send them elsewhere. Each and every teleportation ward that he had constructed was linked to at least 2 other wards. The one that they had used to come here was obviously destroyed to prevent Wei Kai from divining their whereabouts, but there should at least be one more that he could use to escape to. But the next second, he felt his heart skip a beat. He could not pick up any signs of another teleportation ward connected to this one. What a string of unfortunate events. Not only had they stumbled into an enemy that was likely a 7th order, at least, but the teleportation ward could no longer be used. That he could not sense its link to the rest of its counterparts could only mean that the others had been destroyed. There was no way out. His luck had been so good. But all of a sudden, it had taken a plunge. For starters, it was unpredictable what would happen if they were to fight here. Engaging in a battle could result in the entire rock chamber caving in and collapsing on them, regardless of the outcome. All 4 of them could be buried alive here. Lu Yi lifted a hand to stroke Amber. Li Baxian stood in front of Lu Yi, shielding him. This place doesn't seem suitable for a fight, my friend. It's cramped and it's in danger of crashing down. What do you think? He called. Behind his mask, Li Baxian was grimacing grimly at their fate. They had just jumped out of the frying pan and into the fire. He did not know what went wrong with the teleportation ward, but he was right. This really wasn't the ideal place to start a fight. Furthermore, he had the same suspicion as Lu Yi. If the enemy was alone, that would mean that he must be a formidable opponent with might that not even the collective strength of all 3 of them might prevail against. If they could pacify and calm the enemy down, they might be able to walk away from this unscathed. Bing seized his spear and thrust it down on the ground to intimidate everyone, exuding an aura of power and force. Do you think you mice are a threat to me? He grinned. His spiritual power churned. Bing really was a 7th order. Lu Yi and his companions exhaled with relief. They were eased by the notion that the enemy was a 7th order. At the very least, the situation wasn't as dismal as they dreaded. If Bing was an 8th, or even a 9th order, then a victory might only be possible at the cost of their own lives. Nevertheless, that did not make this an easy battle at all. Lu Yi and his group had jointly defeated a 6th order before, but fighting a 7th order was different. None of them had any confidence at all. More importantly, Wei Kai must still be hunting for them. A 9th order could easily cover the distance of 200 miles. So if a fight were to break out now, the commotion could easily attract Wei Kai's, or anyone else's, attention if they were nearby, assuming the cave managed to withstand the abuse of a fight here. Impudence! Lu Yi and his companions maintained their silence, but this only served to embolden Bing. Sneaky scoundrels, he snorted, show yourselves. Remove those masks this instant. That you're tuning in to the Han Li's Immortal Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.